All right, we're live. So tonight I have a pretty practical thing on my mind, which is my thoughts on giving a research based job talk. So a research-based job talk is what you'll need in your job interview for a either a tenure track faculty position in a research intensive position or an industry position where you're doing where you're leading research projects as a principal investigator, and probably for other sorts of positions as well, like if you're at a government lab or you're interviewing for some kind of a research center for a research position. And basically I think that these are the kinds of talks you give when you are interviewing for a job where you are going to be a PI, a principal investigator on research. So I personally had a bunch of experience with this myself, interviewing for tenure track faculty positions, but I think that this applies pretty well to industry positions as well when you are primarily doing research for your job. Although, of course, I haven't had direct experience in that. So, a bit of background on this is that I went on the faculty job market twice. Um, my first time I interviewed at 7 universities, so I gave my research job talk 7 times. And my first time I went to 8, and my second time I went to 7. So it's 15 total. And then I would say for both of those, I practiced at least as many times. So I've probably given, both in front of practice audiences and in front of real, I guess, audiences at interviews, probably around 30 of these things. And it's and I've also been in the audience for a bunch of them. So in my 3 years, this is my fourth year as a professor. So my 3 years so far as a professor, I've sat in on probably like 8 job talks a year, right? So around that same range of like 25 or 30 job talks, and there'll be definitely more coming up this season. So I've written a lot about this. You can read. I'll link to some of the articles, and I'll also link to some of my actual job talk videos as well. But I just want to kind of give some off the cuff notes about it. So I think that again, you can read the articles for more kind of technical or tactical tips. I'm going to give really high level kind of my high level thoughts on this. So the first high level thought is when you go into the room. So I'm just going to actually step through my talk. This one is from UC Berkeley when I interviewed there in 2016. So when you step into the room, first of all, the audience, who are the audience, right? So I think what's really important for every talk is knowing your audience. The audience for these things, the people who have to be there for the most part, are professors in the department in which you are interviewing. And those are the people who are voting for who they're going to give an offer to. So after, 5 job candidates, however many job candidates come by and all give their talks and do their 1 or 2 day interviews, the faculty just do a vote. They do a democratic vote and say, who votes for giving an offer to Jane? Who votes for giving an offer to Joe? Who should we rank? Who should we give an offer to first? Who should we prioritize? And we debate that. So the people in the room are going to be, I would say, in a way, the most important members of the audience are the professors in the voting department. Secondary audience may be just, graduate students who are there, people who are there to attend because it is usually a public talk as part of their, department talk series. So there'll be, graduate students, maybe some undergrads, maybe professors from other departments, people from around the university who are just interested in the topic. So you may get a pretty big audience. You may get a fairly minimal audience as well. So don't be spooked if the audience is big or little. But really, it comes down to it, your primary audience are the faculty who are on the voting, who are going to be voting. So it's, ideally, it would be good to know who they are, right? So you kind of want to scope them out and kind of figure out who they are and kind of talk toward them. Your secondary audience are the people who are there just to enjoy the talk. And of course, they're important as well because, for example, you don't want to alienate them. You don't want to, if they're asking a question, you don't want to be rude to them because if you look like you're rude, then it gives a bad impression for the people who are voting. Okay. Anyway, so that's the audience when you walk in. And then the person, you're going to set up your slides and set up your stuff. I would bring extra, batteries for your projector remote. I would bring a projector remote. I would bring extra cords and stuff and power chargers. Just make sure all your technical setup is good. And there's a bunch of so you can do double check. So don't have any technical problems. I actually, on my second interview, my second round of interviews, I actually brought two laptops. I brought my normal laptop and I brought a tiny laptop as a backup. So I was carrying around two laptops with me always. That's probably a little too paranoid. But anyways, you want to make sure you have no technical problems. Especially different projectors have different color problems and lighting and everything. So I guess on a mechanical note, you want to make your talk like easy to read even on terrible projectors. So like, make sure you don't have stuff right near the edges. Make sure the colors are pretty high contrast. Make sure even if the colors are terrible, you can see pretty well, high contrast, just good accessible slides. Because you're out of the places you go interview, some places you're gonna have terrible projectors and you're gonna be really flustered if your slides don't look good. I know this is a really mechanical thing, but it's super important, because if you get flustered in the beginning, when you plug in your projector, you're just going to be in for a bad time. Okay, I'm just stepping through my Berkeley talk and thinking through it. Okay, then the person who is your host is going to introduce you. Sometimes you'll get a really good host that gives a really rousing introduction. Sometimes you're going to get a really, boring host who just says the usual, reads off your bio from your talk abstract and says, blah, 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 I went to school here and they are interviewing for a job here, whatever. Or maybe they don't even say that. So, it would be great if someone gives you a good intro, but I wouldn't rely on that. Okay, so then what you want to do is when you launch into your talk, I'm going to go a little bit, it's going to be kind of scattered, but the most important thing in the beginning, I personally think, is to introduce yourself in an enthusiastic and warm and inviting and friendly way. So what I usually do is kind of, this is good for talks anywhere, right? This is a good rule of mine for talks anywhere, is know a bit about the place, know a bit about, maybe you have some personal history with the place. Maybe it's your first time visiting and it's been really awesome. You've been walking around campus, you saw these cool things. Maybe you have a personal connection there, maybe just something to like show that you're not just, the person introduces you and you don't just like suddenly go into slide one in robot mode. Like slide one, in the past decade, there have been many, advances in this field. And here's some related work and here's some advances. Slide two, it just seems kind of jarring. So again, this is something that's, it perhaps hard to practice because it's going to be different for every place. And I wouldn't stress too much about it, but I think that just starting on a really personal, friendly note is great, because just to show you're a human being, right? And you have everyone's attention. The thing is, when the person introduces you, when your host introduces you and turns the stage to you, everybody's looking at you or at your first slide, and you will never have more of their attention than you do that right there and then. So that is often the first impression many people have of you who are going to be voting on you. So just make a great first impression. Just, express how grateful you are to be here, how excited you are to be here. Just something. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Just keep it short, keep it, really organic and fresh, and then launch into your first slide. And then, and I would suggest the first part of your talk, 5 minutes or so. I would say the first 5 minutes, you want to tell a story. So, the hallmark, I think, of great talks is storytelling, right? I mean, think about how people are hardwired to engage, even from our childhood stories or bedtime stories. So launch into a really compelling story and hook that you can really hook the audience's attention. This is going to take a lot of work to come up with for your work, especially if you're doing perhaps more theoretical work, but there has to be some hook somewhere to the real world. You have to figure out this hook, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to just like pose a problem that's in your field. And it's like, oh, this is a long-standing problem in X, and people have tried to do this, and I'm going to show a 3-step outline, and here's my talk. And you're just going to lose people. So first 5 minutes, get some kind of hook. Use that as a chance to relate, perhaps relate what you do to, real world current events. Just something. I mean, even if it seems slightly cheesy, just have some story to hook them. And of course, the more closely related to what you do is the better. And I'm gonna go. This video is gonna go way long, but whatever. Um, and then what I think, one way to do a hook, I mean, there's many ways, is to start something really, really, really big. I think that part of what people are looking for is your ability to at least articulate a vision. The V word, vision. So what that means is, instead of starting with a really niche problem, the actual things you did for research might be, or is likely, addressing very niche problems, because that's just the nature of how a lot of research works, right? You are, especially if you're a junior, if you're a graduate student of Postdoc, your work is addressing, you're writing fairly technical, dense publications on small slivers of work. But the thing is, for these kinds of talks, you want to articulate that you can be a principal investigator. You can lead a larger, broader, grander vision. So I would start with something really, really big, even if it's bigger than you think you can possibly handle or plausibly talk about. Start with something huge, and then what you do, once you hook people, the nice thing about starting big is that you hook people. Then once you hook people, you then narrow down and you say, look, here's this giant world here in my field that's humongous, and it's world changing and has, humongous implications for the future of society, really be big. But then you're like, okay, obviously, well, you don't say obviously, but you say, my contribution in the past 6 years during grad school, or doing my postdoc, or doing my other jobs, is to attack a core part of this problem. This is a giant space. I'm going to attack a part of this problem. I have attacked this problem. And another thing I would do to zoom in, there are several approaches to this. This is what I did in my recent job talk, and I would say that, here is the large space of things that's huge and very broad and hopefully inspiring, and then narrowing it down to, here's a smaller space of what I have covered in my prior work over the last 5-6 years, whatever. Now, this is a chance for you to show off very briefly all of the papers that you've written, to, put them up with little citations on the slides, just to show, wow, so when someone looks at it, it's like, wow, this person's done a lot of work. They've published a lot of papers. They've done a lot of work. Cool. Right? So you want to show that overview of what you've done. And then you say, for this particular talk, I'm going to zoom in on these 2 or 3 projects along this even thinner slice of my work, because the practical reason is you can't talk about all your work, right? So I really like this focus of starting really broad in this really inspiring, world-changing way, then zooming down to your entire body of work, however much that encompasses, and then zooming down to the 2 or 3 projects you're going to talk about in the talk. Because the fact of the matter is, you only have time to talk about, say, 2 or maybe 3 projects during the talk itself. So the intro, that first 5 minutes, is so important. I would just stress the importance of practicing and iterating on that. It's so important. It's so important. Anyways, so then you're going to get into probably talking about 2 or maybe 3 technical projects. Now, those are probably going to be from your prior publications, and you want to present them. The most important thing is to present them in a way that a non-expert in the field can understand them, but also put up some technical details so that people who are experts in your field kind of nod and say, okay, this person, did something legitimate. I would say that, like, the actual content of what you put in those body sections, the 2 or 3 body sections in your talk, isn't as important as just scoping it out and making it understandable to people not in your field. And a more important thing, I think, is that connective tissue. So you have, this is a hypothetical setup. You have the first 5 minutes, super inspiring, high level, then zooming in to what you've done within the field, then zooming in even more to introducing the 2 or 3 projects. And then you're going to start talking about project 1. And then you want some connective tissue. You want some good transition. And then you want project 2. And then you want some connective tissue. And then maybe project 3. 2 projects is pretty good. I actually end up covering 3, which is a little bit of a stretch time-wise. But the connective tissue between projects, that transition, that story arc that you give between your giant introduction that's highly motivating and the little slivers of connective tissue between your 2 projects, that is what you really have to work on, because you already have talks made and papers done about about your actual content of your projects. That just needs to be condensed and polished up. You've talked about those projects tons of times before, so you have that well rehearsed, I'm pretty sure. But the connective tissue in that first 5 minutes and the little 1 minute connective tissue between your projects is so important, because otherwise your talk is just going to be two conference talks smushed together, or two, just kind of two regular talks smushed together. And that's just, you want something that's bigger than the whole. The whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. Okay, so we have two projects, and then the last part of your talk is the future work, and this is when you have to get inspiring and big again. So I think that one extreme view of job talks is that this is an extreme straw person view, but I think it's that the first 30 minutes or 35 or 40 minutes, I think, is a teaser to your last 10 minutes. Your last 10 minutes or so of future work, that's where you really have to kick it into high gear again. So I would say that for the talk energy itself, you want to start off as high gear as you can, because the person, your host, has just introduced you. Maybe people have preemptively clapped if they're a polite audience. No matter what, you have their attention. Just go for it. You're so grateful to be there. You're so happy to be here. You're so excited to share your work, and to kind of talk about how this is really going to be impactful for the future of your field, blah, blah. And then, you mellow out into the one or two projects that are the kind of technical core of your talk. And at the very end, you want to kick it up again, because you're like, all right, let's summarize my projects. I laid out this high level vision. I talked about project 1. I talked about project 2. Let's wrap it up. And then now let's get to the fun part, right? And the fun part is that last 10 minutes of your equivalent of a TED Talk. The last 10 minutes is, okay, this is why you should hire me. And it's because, I have all this work I've done in the past to show that I'm a legitimate in this field. And this is my big vision for the future moving forward. This is how I'm going to change, totally upend the paradigm, totally, revolutionize. I mean, I don't know if you should say such hyperbolic words, but really that's what you want to convey, that you're going to revolutionize your field and really make a dent in it in the next 5 years. And how are you going to do that? And the way you don't want to do that is to say, my future work is, here's some extensions of project 1, blah, blah, blah. Here are some extensions of project 2, blah, blah, blah. Thank you, questions, right? That is just going to fall right flat, and you're going to fall on your face at the very end. You want to end with the most inspiring TED Talk you can give. And this is going to be a stretch for some people, because you're going to be seeming like you're just making up stuff. But hey, that is what a lot of times you're going to have to do to articulate visions and make them come true. A lot of what you're going to have to do as a principal investigator is to make up stuff and then will it into existence by amassing resources, by starting projects, by recruiting students and people, and pushing that force of will into reality. So do that at the end of your job talk. That is your TED Talk moment. That is your moment to shine. And you want to basically, by the end, you want to end on such an up note that people are just, clamoring to hire you and say I want to see someone do this work here. I want this work to be done right here, because it's going to get all these awards. It's going to get all this funding. It's going to get all this great press. It's going to make our department really proud. It's going to elevate our status. We're going to be on the front page of the New York Times. We're going to be, the governor and the senator and the president are going to be talking about us because we're going to hire this person. And if we don't hire this person, some other school is going to hire this person, and they're going to get all the fame and glory, and we're going to be mad. That's the ending you want to end on. I know this is a bit hyperbolic, but I want to set the bar high, right? I want to set the bar high, because in practicality, it's not always going to go that well. But you want to end on a high note. And don't worry if you're making up stuff in the end. This is pure speculation. This is your future work. This is your vision. Really, really own it. Don't be timid about it and just say, I'm going to extend this work in A, B, C, D, E, F. Think about the people in the audience. They don't know anything about your work, pretty much. They know nothing about your work. They're often from different subfields, maybe different fields entirely. So whatever you make up, as long as it's somewhat plausible and related to your prior work, they'll be like, yeah, that's cool. That sounds good. That sounds pretty interesting. So this is also a good good preview for how good you'll be at writing grant proposals, which is an important part of the research gig. Okay, this video ran super, super long, but that's just my general take on all this. And remember that most of the people, the final note is, when you're crafting that job talk, most of the people in the audience will have absolutely no idea what your field is, what the related projects are, what you have done, what all the technical details are. Most of the people who are voting on your case are outsiders to your field. So really keep that in mind, because in contrast to writing a technical paper or presenting a talk to your particular subfield's audience, you are really pitching this talk for people outside of your field. That is super, super important. That's why job talks are so tricky to get right. But that's just my view on it. I think this is my longest video ever at about 20 minutes. So hopefully have fun, and I will link to the related articles and videos below. Okay, good luck.